1. I am looking for advice on what exactly may have happened to me tonight. I will try to make it short, but it's a bit of a long story. 2 months ago, I got an order to deliver to an address near the water. On my way there, I felt strange, but I continued. I was using Apple Maps, and it was saying the building I was delivering to was on the marina. On the way there, I passed a large gravel lot. It should now be noted that at 6 p.m. I saw no cars on the road at all. I thought it was strange, but I kept trekking on. My maps began bugging out, sending me all over the marina, back and forth, sideways and down. I eventually ended up going back into my driveway app to double-check the address. And when I looked, I saw a note. This was definitely not there before I started going to the address. I always check. And the note said Hotel Indigo. After I went back to Maps to put in the hotel name, it started telling me to go back the way I came, so I went. On the way back, all of a sudden, it's like I blinked and I was in a different space. I was on the same road, but it felt different. I was in the same area, but it felt different. And then I looked to my right, and there it is, the Hotel Indigo. A huge building that there is no way I could have missed. I pull in next to a bunch of nice cars, too new. They seemed almost staged. I double and triple checked that there were no drinks I was forgetting, as I always do, and there's nothing. I go inside, I don't see a single person, but I deliver the food to the customer in room 314. He tips me $6 and I left. I felt in a hurry to leave and I sped off. About 10 minutes later, I get a call from the customer saying I forgot their drink. Remember, there was no drink when I dropped off the food. So I look to my right and there it is, a Frosty, again almost too perfect, staged. Not even a little melted, like it was just put there. My gut turned, my face got hot, and I told the customer, "I'm sorry, I cannot return." And I continued on my way. I felt lighter, physically and mentally, when I hung up, like I had made a vitally important decision. I was by myself this whole time, and left it at that. I blew it off as I was tired. I went home and went to bed. A few weeks ago, I started getting this strange urge to go to the beach. Tonight I finally convinced my friend and her kids to go to the beach with me. We picked a random beach to go to and put on Apple Maps to take us there. Halfway there it goes from horrible traffic to barely any cars on the road. Slowly I start to get a bad feeling. Slowly I start to get nervous and I don't know why. And then I realize, we're right by Hotel Indigo. But I don't see it. I don't see it anywhere. I mention it to my friend, and she doesn't doubt my story, but doesn't take it too seriously. Then Map starts acting up. It tells us to turn right suddenly, and so we do. It takes us down a one-way road, but thankfully there were still no cars at rush hour. We all start to feel weird, and I mention to her the whole Hotel Indigo thing. And we turn around and start to head home. I point to where the hotel should be, a clear view from the road, and no one sees it. Then we pass a building that blocks our view for a moment, and on the other side there it is, Hotel Indigo. We're all freaking out. The road is empty, the air feels different, and my friend turns down the road to it, and just like last time, new cars, too new, almost staged. We drive towards it, turn around and go the other way. The dog in the car was freaking out the whole time since we first saw it. And once we got a certain distance away from it, he yelped out like he was in pain, and then went back to completely normal. We all kept asking ourselves, did you see what I saw? Did that really just happen, etc. I thought I was crazy the first time it happened to me, but now that I have it confirmed by 3 other people, I know there must be some who are more knowledgeable than us, who can give me their opinion on what happened to us tonight. Any advice is wanted. Thank you. 2. In November, I was driving pretty late at night to a friend's house because she was upset. On my way to her house, there's this part of the road that dips down slightly. Makes me incredibly uneasy, but that's expected. Anyways, immediately after passing this part, something in me told me to slow down, like instinct. And I did not really enough, but I went from speeding to about 5 below the speed limit. Anyways, just after that spot, another driver came into my lane and hit me head on. Now here's where things get kind of crazy. Weeks before this accident, there were tons of little signs that were warning me of what was going to happen. The first thing that happened was about a week before my accident, and that I was at work and got a text from someone that I was not close with to begin with. But all the text said was, "I heard you were in an accident, are you okay?" That was all he said. I told him I wasn't, and asked where he heard that from, and he said he thought he read it somewhere but couldn't find it. Second, this guy I was close with burned his hand, only a little bit. I joked with him he'd lose his hand to infection if he didn't take care of it. We just laughed it off, and he held my hand really tight after for no reason. This was only a few days before the wreck, where I tore the 2 tendons in my hand on the windshield, and although I was lucky, and I still have my hand, it was very, very close. Tons of other little signs weeks before the accident, but I'll focus on the day of the accident. I woke up and it was a normal day, but you could tell something was off. I sent a text message to a class group chat we had that was meant for a friend. Quite embarrassing, but nothing new for me. All my friends told me I should just stay home that day, because it was so embarrassing. But like I said, I do things like that all the time. So I went to class anyways, and then just a series of bad and embarrassing things happened. I don't know how to quite explain, but it was just bad. Anyways, I took a friend to work, and he had his feet on the dash of my car. I told him to be careful. If he hit hard, the airbags would go off. I had an older car, and they always joked and called it a shitbox, so he said he doubts the airbags even worked. Well, we found out a few hours later they do. And my mom never rode in my car. Literally, the only time she did was that night, when I took her to the store before I went to my friend's. We talked for a bit, and she asked if I'd been checking my fluids and everything. My mom never asks anything about cars. It was the most random thing in the world for her to do. So we checked, and made sure everything was okay. I told her how much I loved my car, and how I hoped I'd have it for a few more years. It was an older car and not great, but I loved it and still miss it. And finally, when I was about to drive off, I texted another friend and told her I couldn't talk. I was about to be driving, and I saw her message the next day after the accident. But she texted a long message about staying safe and that she's thinking about both me and my friend and how much she loved me. We never really sent messages like that. This was about an hour before the accident, so the next day, when I was out of the hospital, I asked why she sent that, and she said she really didn't know, she just felt like she needed to. I don't know how to fully explain that everything in my life for 2 weeks was leading up to this accident. But I hope this makes sense and doesn't sound crazy. 3. I took my fiancée to an urgent care and I left my purse there. So I went back to get it, and it was about 30 minutes before they closed. And I noticed when I pulled in that there was a bunch more cars there compared to when I was there earlier. I walked in, and the waiting room was packed, and there was someone sitting in the seats where I was sitting, filling out papers. And I was trying to look under the chair without trying to make it seem like I was looking at them. I went to the window and asked if a purse was found, and she gave it to me. I was in there for about 60 seconds, and once I turned around, the waiting room was empty. Once I turned around, I was literally like, WTF. There were only 2 doors in the room, and the one to go back to the doctor is right by the window, so within my view. And I saw no one go back. The other door is the exit, and I feel like I would have heard a whole waiting room full of people shuffle towards the door. And I was only turned around for all of 45 seconds. Plus, there were people filling out papers and sitting in the back in the corner. So it really just messed me up, because I feel like by the time I turned around, it wouldn't have even gave half of them enough time to leave. This was 2 days ago. The next thing might not be as major, and maybe has a reasonable explanation, but my roommate asked me to move my car, and when I turned the car on, I cut the lights off because it was shining in their face. Once they pulled out and I got back into the driveway, I literally told myself to turn the lights back on, or I would end up driving around without them on. And I turned the knob and took the key out. Later that night, me and my fiancée went to Cracker Barrel, and the whole ride, I'm like, I can't see the road. I'm like, why? And I knew my lights were on, so I was just pissed. We get all the way back home, and we get on our road where there are no streetlights. And I'm like, hold up, my lights aren't on? When I know for a fact I cut them on. Which, I don't know, maybe a reasonable explanation for that, but it just threw me off. And if the thing with the waiting room hadn't just happened the same day, I would have probably thought nothing of it. The next day, I used my dad's credit card to go get food for him, and accidentally forgot to give it back to him. Later that day, he calls and asks me to bring it, but get some money out the ATM. So I went and got the money and headed to his house. But then I saw his girlfriend driving up their road, and I waved at her and thought, why didn't he just wait and send her to get the money? But anyways, then I pull into the driveway and her car is there. So I was like, what? I just literally drove by you. I go inside and she's in there. I told her what just happened and she was like, well, there are a lot of Hondas around. And I was like, yeah, but right up the road from your house? With you inside them? And again, maybe there is a logical explanation for that, but I don't know. She has a brand new 2020 Honda, so I want to know the likeliness that there would be one on the exact same road with someone who looked just like her. And waved at me like she knew me. I've just been feeling weird the past few days since the waiting room thing. Last night, I went to a Dollar Tree and pulled into a spot next to a big SUV and noticed a big sticker on the back of their car, and then went inside. When I came out, my car was 2 spots away from the SUV. I don't know, y'all. I'm not crazy, but it's been 3 days. And if anything weird happens today, I'm gonna freak out. These next incidents I'm about to add happened between a month to 3 years ago. I don't know if they technically fit, but they were weird instances, so I wanted to add them. About a month ago, I was watching my niece at my sister's house. And she has 2 dogs and was sleeping, and they wouldn't be quiet, so I went into the kitchen, and literally a split second before "shut up, dogs" came out of my mouth, I heard a very loud, stern, manly voice yell, "Hush!" It sounded like it came from right beside me, but like over me, like a tall man would have said it. The dogs heard it too. I was so shook I literally locked myself in the living room for the rest of the time I was there. I even had to check the attic to make sure no one was here. She just moved into this house the first week of January, so I'm not sure if anything like that has happened before. But I didn't want to tell my sister because she was already scared of this house, because she thought she heard somebody breaking in, but it ended up being nothing. About 2 or 3 years ago, my fiancé and I were staying at my dad's. My fiancé went to go see his grandmother in hospital and I stayed home. I'm just gonna add my door frame was messed up, so it didn't really close right. It didn't click into the hole, so you could pull and push the door while it was locked. Anyways, I'm just chilling and I hear something in the hallway. It sounded like footsteps, but like they stopped right in front of my door, and our dog heard it too. He went up to the door and started sniffing. The only people home are me and my dad and his girlfriend, and they all work 3rd shift, so I know they were asleep. I tried to ignore it and turn on my TV, but then something snatched my door handle so hard it made me and my dog jump, and I never went to check it out. But I know it wasn't my dad because I heard him come out of his room later on, so I don't know. I would say this one was about 3 or 4 years ago, and me, my fiancé, and his mom went to get my sister-in-law from the beach. We went to the sand and stayed on the beach for about 30 minutes or so, and we saw this huge ship, like gigantic, you could see it from a mile away. Anyways, we're all like, damn, that thing is huge. Then we start talking to this lighthouse over to the left right off the island, and there's no way we were turned around for more than a minute or 2. And we turned back around and the ship is gone. There is no way it could have gone over the horizon in that amount of time with where it was sitting in the water. Everybody was tripping. No one had an explanation as to what happened to the ship. And still don't know what could have happened. 4. Let me start this out by saying that I am not overly superstitious. Meaning, while I love a good ghost story and scary movies, I don't really believe a demon is going to pull on my feet at night, just because I fucked with a Ouija board. Though logic dictates, if that were the case, why even do it to begin with? Most summers, when my sister and I were younger, her about 17 or 18, me about 15 or 16, we would stay home and clean, when we weren't fighting over who would choose what movie to watch. This one summer, my sister and I decided to do a deep clean to make up for my mom coming home to a messy house the day before and scolding us. We broke up sections of the house. My sister said she would take the back of the house and hit her room with what she called the organizational purge, and I would handle the kitchen and front sitting room. From what I recall, it took all day, and towards the end of the day, probably at 3:30 or 4-ish, we would eventually turn off whatever cleaning music we had on and just kind of enjoyed the silence. Those were the good old days. Anyways, I remember I was in the kitchen. My back was turned to the wall that separated the kitchen and dining room from the hallway that led to the bedrooms and bathroom. That wall also had a cutout portion and shelving where we displayed family pictures and such. I was in the kitchen, organizing the mail that always seemed to pile up on the kitchen table after a few weeks, when I see my sister walked past me and into the backyard. She didn't address me, nor I her. I honestly thought she was going to take out the trash or something. During those hot summers, we would typically leave the sliding door open to let fresh air into the house, and to get access to the trash bins on the side of the house instead of walking through the garage. I remember her walking out to the backyard only because she had to part the blinds that covered the sliding door, and they usually make this specific rattling sound when they are parted, and return back to their place. I guess the funny thing about living in a specific place for more than a decade is you remember the sound of the way things move and function. It becomes so distinct, it's almost hard to explain. After what felt like a long enough time to wonder why she hadn't come back in, I walk over to the sliding door and peek out into the backyard. Maybe she was just sitting on the patio and texting or something, but she wasn't there. I turn around and call out, "Bella!" I hear my sister call from the far end of the house in her room, "What?" My heart kind of sank. At that time, my sister was really into sage and cleansing and binding and such. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't slightly interested in that stuff at the time, too. "Come here for a sec?" I asked. I heard her let out an annoyed grunt. "Why?" At this point, I was starting to get really freaked out. "Isabella, get over here! What the fuck?" I hear her shuffle and walk down the hallway. I was relieved to see it was really her. I explained what happened and asked if she had went out to the backyard a second ago. She told me that she was in her room this entire time organizing all of her stuff. I told her I swore on Mom and the dog's lives that I had seen her walk past me and into the backyard. To this day, I still don't know who the hell it was that walked past me in the kitchen, and if it was really my sister Isabella or something else. Come to think of it, I never saw a face, just the back of her, or its head. Had to be some kind of glitch. My sister always goes to the backyard to smoke pot nowadays. Maybe it was a different time in the future we hadn't experienced yet. 5. When I was in the 5th grade, we used to go out into the school field for recess. The schoolyard was quite large with an upper and lower level. We were playing kickball, and it was my turn to go up to the plate. I kicked the ball, and as all kids do, I immediately ran towards first base, but I never made it there. Well, I must have, but I have no recollection of it whatsoever. I would say about 60 to 70% of the way to first base, my vision quickly, but not immediately, faded into complete whiteness. I remember having an odd feeling over my head as it happened. It took only a second or two for me to have a complete white-out vision. To this day, with crystal clarity, I can remember looking over my left towards the pitcher while running to first. Shortly after, my vision came back, just before I made it to the plate. Except this time it wasn't first base, it was home plate. I remember my vision as well as my cognition returning to normal levels. Again, not immediately, with about 5 feet between myself and home base. I was currently running, and I never broke my stride, making it to home base. It wasn't a shocking return to consciousness like you would experience from being awoken somewhere unfamiliar. Immediately, I knew that I never remembered running. My vision was just white. What happened? I made it home, I scored a point, okay, that's good. I remember thinking in shorter words. I remember going back to sit at the end of the line for people waiting to go up to the plate again. As I sat there confused next to a friend of mine, another kid asked me several times,
Hey, why were you running so slow?
Being a shy introvert, his question made me feel silly, so I quickly defended myself with the best lie I could think of. I thought it was an out. I repeated 2 or 3 times. The other kid simply couldn't stop asking, as what he'd seen me do, the way I was running, must have appeared so strange. Thankfully, my friend, who I think was also his friend, said,
Nah, he thought it was an out. He thought it was an out.
I was generally a pretty good kicker, but I'd like to note that I remember clearly that when I had kicked the ball in my return, I didn't kick it good enough to score a home run. Somewhere to the right of my vision had caught the ball after a bounce. This means I must have waited there for someone else's kick, and then started to run again. All of this happened, but I wasn't there to see it. I've been searching for just the right subreddit for this story. I'm amazed that I haven't tried to share this on the internet until it just hit me right now. The few people I've told either don't believe me or weren't very outspoken about it, thought I was exaggerating, or perhaps that I must be remembering the events incorrectly. I am 27 years old now, but I was 10 years old when this happened. Although this hasn't affected me at all throughout my life, being a curious mind, it's always managed to come up and spark in my head this one question. What the hell happened that day? 6. At first this might sound like my iPad is glitching, but listen till the end and see why I'm posting. For reference, I have an iPad Pro that I bought 3 years ago. My screen is cracked and is due for a software update. Anyway, Siri has been acting up lately by frequently chiming in and asking me to repeat what I've said. For weeks I wrote it off as somehow, because my screen is cracked, I triggered the long hold button press to summon her, where then I have to press the home button to get her to go away. Sometimes, instead of pressing the home button, I'll tell her I don't need anything or not right now, Siri, and she'll close out. Recently, she'll chime in when I'm not touching the screen at all. I'll be watching a movie or YouTube video or something. Then I played it off like my cheap headphones or something must have triggered her. It started happening a lot to the point I actually checked to see if my earbuds have a button on them. Nope, just a mic. Before you question it, there has been little to no chance that a "Hey Siri" would be the reason she continues to chime in. I'm not talking and no one else is, whenever she chimes in. Last night, things got even weirder. I was laying in bed watching YouTube until I was tired enough to fall asleep. At least 4 or 5 times my iPad and Siri acted in a strange way. One time I took an earbud out to hear my boyfriend to see if he was up and about, or fell asleep on the couch. The moment I took an earbud out to hear him, the video paused. I looked back at my screen like, then listened to find out he was asleep on the couch. A similar occurrence happened twice before, but I played it off as nothing, because it wasn't as deliberate as this time. So I have an earbud in my hand, and I hear my boyfriend snoring on the couch. I put my earbud back in and looked at my screen, and the video started playing. I didn't have to hit play like normal. This was when I was like, okay, I'm convinced something abnormal is happening here. The night goes on, and the video paused at the right time again, but I'd have to hit play again. Then this morning's Matrix glitch happened. I was listening to a YouTube ASMR playlist I created while sleeping the last 4 hours, and it had planned on playing for another 6 hours. I was dreaming. In my dream, dreams are hard to explain. I was rewriting and illustrating stories a 7-year-old boy wrote in a children's book. His stories were written in his handwriting, so it was unreadable, yet my dreaming self knew what it said. And as I was planning to illustrate his words, just like the book he wrote on had illustrated their stories, if that makes sense, it was a kid's book about animals, and I didn't know the boy. Then dream transitions. I look out into another room where I have a handful of parrots of a variety of species. I look around behind me and I see the birds' owners. Turns out I'm babysitting for a while. Then they have a good idea about recording their voices for the birds while they're away. This would aid in the birds' stress levels, as birds tend to freak out and pull feathers if things like this would happen in real life. So I'm like, yeah, this sounds great, give me a sec. I'll start a new playlist on my iPad. Real Siri chimes loud in my ear and says, "Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Can you repeat that?" I was pulled out of my dream immediately and just lay there shocked. She asked me again like 5 or 6 more times until she just closed herself. That freaked me out so much, I was gonna forget about it and just try to go back to sleep. But then an ad about screaming and attacking zombies played loud in my ear, and I was forced to grab my iPad and skip the ad. The aggressive zombies in the ad made me get up and contemplate what had just happened. I've been keeping a dream journal because I'm interested in lucid dreaming. The whole thing seems cool, but I just don't get how people can be so immersed in a dream that you mistake it for reality. Anyway, this has been the closest I've come to lucid dreaming. And maybe I'm making a step in the right direction or whatever, but I still think this was more glitch than lucid dreaming, so after I wrote it down, I contemplated whether or not to post it. I wasn't going to, mainly because that'd mean I'd have to re-download this app, so I decided against it. But then when I went to open up YouTube, nothing would load. Okay, whatever, so I opened up a game app, and it too wouldn't load or connect. I was connected because I got a YouTube upload notification while waiting for the game to connect. Waited a little longer and still nothing. Usually these apps load and connect immediately, so I took it as a sign to write it here. So here it is. 7. My now wife and I were at my uncle and aunt's house for dinner, games, scary movies, and a sleepover. They're big horror buffs, so we had movies playing in the background all night while we played, ate, sipped wine, and generally had a fun time. When my family gets together, we tend to stay up until we're basically dead from exhaustion. We're all avid conversationalists, talking everything from politics, food, hip-hop, family gossip, theoretical physics, whatever books we're reading at the moment, etc., etc. My aunt finally convinced my wife and I to take on The Witch, which we were both a bit freaked out by, just from the trailers. We enjoy horror, but more on the psychological side. We're both from very Christian families, so we're still residually a little stitious when it comes to demons and witchcrafty stuff. But we're also very science-oriented and like to think we're quite logical. Let's just say that as soon as the baby sacrifice scene came up, like a minute in, my wife was not having it. We said something like, "Oh, hell nah," and shut it off. We all had a laugh at how wimpy we were, and while the rest looked through other movie options, I volunteered to take their bloodhound outside for the last pee of the night. It was a bit past 2 a.m., I want to say, and appropriately foggy out. I remember that their street was well lit by the other suburban houses and the street lamps across the street, and it was comfortably chilly in the way the nights in late summer can be. I was watching Holmes, the doggo, making sure she stayed close, looking around the eerie scene. I've always loved foggy nights. Between every driveway on the street was a generic street lamp, black metal, about 15 feet high, or whatever. I suddenly noticed that the one to the right of their driveway was bent all the way to the ground from the base, not snapped or uprooted, but bent. I thought it was weird. I assumed a big truck must have run it down, even though that seemed unlikely, as they were really strong-looking, and we hadn't heard any loud noises corresponding to that. That was weird enough. I went inside and got my wife to come see it. When she came out, she was as baffled as me. As we continued studying it, we eventually realized that this lamppost wasn't the only one. At least the next 2 were in the same state. I want to say there were 4 total, but I don't want to exaggerate. We brought my aunt outside, who thought I was trying to prank them, and she was exactly as confused as we were. Eventually, we chalked it up to something weird, but not impossible, and finally retired for the night around 3 a.m. In the morning, all the lampposts were upright, and there wasn't any sign they'd been tipped to begin with. Seriously. Maybe the city was replacing them, and that's how they'd do it. But they'd have to have done the job while we were sleeping without waking anyone up. And tipping them over after midnight. It was all very weird, and we ended up chalking it up to something weird, but obviously not impossible. Any ideas? This actually happened, and I've wondered about it now and then ever since. And no, we never finished The Witch. 8. This happened 3 days ago, and I'm still paranoid. I don't know what happened or how long I was gone, but I swear I wasn't here for what felt like a long time. I don't know where I would have gone if I didn't react. Let me explain. I live on campus at a college. That's the main reason downtown is so busy. There's always people in cars all over the place, along with animals since it's a woodsy area. And being said, this all started around 10 p.m. I was hungry and it was late, so like any normal lazy person, I decided on fast food. The weather was nice and I decided to take advantage, so I left the radio off and the windows down in my drive, watching all the students walk from parties and, surprisingly, still hearing birds. Everything was normal until I got to that red light. In the middle of downtown, I stopped my car at the light and something didn't feel right. I started paying more attention and realized there was nothing. The cars parked on the street were gone, not a person or animal in sight, and everything was silent. The wind wouldn't even blow. I waited for the light to turn green for a few minutes and looked back at my clock to see how long it had been. It said 4:13 a.m. That was impossible. At first, I thought maybe my car clock was just wrong, so I checked my phone. Nope. 4:13 a.m. there too. The silence weirded me out, but now that the clock said it was the middle of the night, I saw cars and people on this exact road like 5 minutes earlier. But when I got here, they were gone. I was freaking the fuck out. I didn't turn my car off, but I put it in park and got out. I know, it sounds stupid and dangerous, but I wasn't going to walk too far from it. I walked to the window of a 24-hour store just a few feet away, but the lights were out and it was empty. I tried calling a friend to see if they could come and get me, because clearly I was insane, but there was no service. In this backwoods, middle-of-nowhere town, I didn't hear or see a single animal. Suddenly, there were no stars in the sky, and it should have been no later than 10:15 p.m. I went back to my car thinking maybe I was confused earlier, but that was impossible, and I was pretty much shitting myself rather than trying to rationalize. The clock still said 4:13 a.m. Time had to have passed, but it didn't. The lights never turned green, and there was not a soul in sight. Being the complete pussy I am, I decided to drive through the red light, and that was it. The second I drove through that light, all signs of life were back. Cars driving through the intersection I was at, people still walking, and late-night businesses were open. The clock said 10:12 p.m. like it should have. I don't know where I went. If I wasn't freaking out enough to just keep going, what would have happened to me? When I got home, I saged my car and blessed my apartment. Call it purgatory, an alternate universe, or whatever you want. But even now, I have no idea if I'm in the same world I started in. 9. To begin with, this happened roughly 3 weeks ago, while traveling back from Winnipeg to the Pas, Manitoba, Canada. Me and a friend, G, went to Winnipeg for the night and day, traveled there during the evening, and came back the following day at 1 p.m. The way to Winnipeg was normal. It took us 6 hours as usual. I've done this trip numerous times, as the Pas is my hometown, which I've recently moved back to from Winnipeg. On the way back, the first 3.5 hours go by normally. I was driving the speed limit most of the time, as it was icy, plus snowing most of the time. So we come up to the turnoff where Highway 6 turns onto the 60, at about 4 p.m. At this point, the conditions are ideal, and the sun's just about at the horizon. It was a beautiful sky with a crimson sun. This is where things got really fucking strange. The first odd instance happened about 20 minutes on this highway. A red van overtook us right before a right turn and rounded a sharp bend. When we came around the bend, the van had vanished, and it was a long straight high for a bit. I thought this was weird, but I didn't pay any mind to it, nor did I mention it to my friend. Shortly after this, I made a comment about how gorgeous the sky was. By this time, the sun was just cresting the horizon at about 11 o'clock angle. By this time, it's about 4:45, so we've been on the highway for 45 minutes. This highway takes about an hour till you get to the next turnoff, which is the 10, the final turnoff en route to the Pas. We drive for the next 20 minutes without words, just the radio playing. Then my friend G made the comment, "Have you noticed there hasn't been any road signage?" I didn't realize, but there were no signs indicating when a turn was coming up, nor were there any signs in regard to how far we were from the towns in kilometers. No signs whatsoever. At this point, I noticed the sun hadn't moved an inch in the sky. On top of this, we haven't seen any other vehicle in a while. I thought this was strange, man, so did my friend. Unnerved, I sped up, going between 120 and 140 kph. I started having this overwhelming feeling something was wrong. Then I noticed another anomaly along the other glaring things that were already making this experience really fucked up. All the trees were the same height, and the tree line was extremely dense, like a wall of trees. This was scary, because then I realized this scenery was not at all what it should be. Where we were should have been a sparse tree line with small ponds and marshland on both sides of the highway. We've been on this highway now for 2 hours. The sun still hasn't moved. Still no road signs, no traffic. We're not where we should be. Me and G are stuck on this highway, and we're starting to get scared. Trying to piece together and figure out what is happening. We've both lived our fair share of paranormal phenomenon. Not to mention traumatic experiences at that. I've known G my whole life, and this experience is undeniably our most terrifying. Out of nowhere, the sun sets unnaturally fast, which takes maybe 2 minutes. We are enveloped in this darkness of a starless night without a moon. I am scared. G is scared. 2 25-year-old men, pretty well shaken. And just when this ominous, oppressive feeling was unbearable, we came to the turnoff out of nowhere. 3 hours we were stuck on that highway that takes barely over an hour to travel. But it didn't end there. Just when I thought we were returning to normality, I glanced in the rearview mirror because I thought for the first time in 3 hours I'd seen headlights. I was wrong. In the back seat, sitting behind me on the driver's side, was a black human silhouette with glowing yellow eyes. G and I both saw it. I couldn't believe what we were experiencing. All of a sudden, what happened was so unreal and so fantastical sounding. But on my life, I promise, what you've heard is real and articulated to the best of my ability. The next hour and a half were terrifying and mostly set in silence. We finally pulled into the pass shortly before midnight. We were stuck 2.5 hours in some sort of limbo with unreal anomalies that made no sense, and were totally conscious and aware the whole time, making note of the time. We are totally lost on an explanation of what happened. I'm posting for any answers or relation of similar experience. 10. I'll just say I've never told this story to anyone because of the fear of being called insane. My girlfriend resides on the opposite side of the small town we both live in. During normal, non-quarantine life, I go over to her house and pick her up around 3 or 4 times a week. We've been doing this for around 3 years, and I know her area well as most of her neighbors. I know their faces at the very least, though I'm sure there are some residents I've never seen. One day, a few months ago, I was driving over as usual, and on the last turn before I got onto her street, I noticed a man I had never seen before walking on the sidewalk in front of me as I was about to turn right. Imagine the intersection as a T, and I am no longer the bottom stick turning right. The man is right in front of me, walking as I'm yielding for oncoming traffic. I am the only one with a stop sign. He looked like a darker-skinned Indian dude who was on his phone looking down at it, wearing an off-red shirt and blue jeans. There was no immediately apparent reason as to why he would stand out to me. Lots of people are always out in her neighborhood. But for some reason I consciously recognized him as out of place, and I assumed it was because I hadn't seen him before. As soon as I felt something was off, he abruptly looked up from his phone and directly at me. He also slowed down and stopped walking. I didn't stop watching him because this whole thing was registering in my mind as just plain weird. Then, exactly like something out of a movie, a car passed directly in front of him, while he maintained his stare, and he literally disappeared into thin air in front of my sober eyes. It was around 3 or 4 p.m. on a clear day, so everything was well lit. The car wasn't as tall as the top of his head, but as the car passed, his head just disappeared. And while it was happening, I thought maybe he was just bending over to pick something up, or squatting down or something. But nevertheless, when the car passed, he was just gone. No smoke or mist or anything left over, just gone. There was nowhere that he could have gone. The nearest front door was like 10 feet away from where he was standing, and there was nothing like a trash can or anything he could have hid behind. Beyond that, though, why would he hide from me? And why did he look right at me unprompted? I've never seen him before in my life. After the car passed, I just turned right because there were cars behind me, and I picked up my girlfriend and brought her back home as usual. I didn't bring it up, and we enjoyed each other's company for a few hours. I dropped her back off at her home in the evening, drove the same way, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I tried to just let it go as weird timing or a perceptual trick I played on myself, but I just couldn't shake it. That night the event stuck in my mind and kind of creeped me out the more I thought of it because it was just so weird. I've tried to just forget about it, but it stuck with me, unexplained. I'm young and have never had problems with drugs, mental health, hallucinations, eye problems, or anything I can think of that would make me perceive something like this. I can't forget his face, and the whole thing just feels like it shouldn't have happened. "11. I remember places I've never been to from time to time. I should start by saying that this is a very minimal glitch, since I have no proof it is one, or just something my brain creates from time to time. I don't really know how to express it, but from time to time I come across a place, a person, a smell, a situation, or whatever that gives me a deep feeling sometimes associated with a brief vision, in my head, not an hallucination, of a place. It's really hard to describe, but it's been happening as far as I can remember. I just didn't care too much about it until recently, when I figured that some of these places would often come back. That's when I decided to try and actively remember those places and the feeling it was associated with. I'm dumb, so I didn't bother to write anything down, so that's what I'm trying to do right now, to try and remember better. There are 3 places in particular that come back more often, and I managed to remember. The first one is one that I remember most. I'm in a cold garden, probably before winter, leaves are on the ground. A metal fence with spades all around, a dried concrete pool in the middle, not rectangular, more like a coat of arms, like something from the Baroque era, with a cold mansion close to the dried pool. Like I said, it comes with a feeling which is sort of loneliness. It doesn't bring sadness, it just feels empty. I could also date this from between 17 to 1800, somewhere like that. I can't explain, I just feel it from what I saw. The second one I remember less, since those visions last a couple seconds and I don't have a lot of details. Anyway, this one is way older, like beginning of the modern civilization old. I can't date this one. I just remember being on a yellow, dusty cliff, watching a deep blue sea in front of me, no end in sight, no clouds in the sky, it feels very hot. And on my left is a huge brick wall, the same color as the ground, sort of dusty yellow, that goes like 50 meters in the sky. It feels really tall. This one also feels empty, but not in the same way. It feels like everything is so big for humans, like there's not much in the way of living souls on the planet yet. The third one I remember practically nothing, and is also the most modern one, I would say. I'm outside once again. I see a big white modern building, nothing too fancy. White painted metal and glass, with a few bamboo plants alongside. There's a path leading somewhere on the side of that building, but I don't know more. This one feels like something that could be happening in the future, strangely. At least, the near future. It doesn't come with a deep feeling, just kind of empty like the others. I have a lot of these visions, but most of the time I just feel like it's something my brain makes up in reaction to something I saw or whatever. But I have to say, these 3 come back more than the others, and give me a weird feeling like I've been there. What do you think? Did it happen to you? Thanks for taking the time to listen. 12. To be clear from the start, I don't believe in ghosts, demons, or just about anything supernatural. I have found no religious preference to trust in. I believe most religion is no more than an attempt to control the population. Be a good boy, or when daddy comes home you're getting a whooping. However, I cannot force myself to believe that this short, 78-year life of ours is all the time we have in this massive universe. The universe exploded out of nothing nearly 14 billion years ago, and we think it will last billions more. Scientists estimate that there are close to 100 billion galaxies. These galaxies have hundreds of billions of stars with hundreds of billions of planets orbiting them. Somewhere in that massive space, the Milky Way is still churning out stars. Our sun, born years and years ago, is shining bright and using its gravity to help shape our future. The Earth, unrecognizable of course, has recently been smashed into by Theia. This crash birthed our moon, which we all know how important the moon is, and for many different reasons. Time ticks on by, not being kept by anyone just yet, and more complex changes continue to occur. That same space dust that shot outward from the Big Bang traveled millions of light years and went through millions of changes, has done it again. The sun heated up elements so much that it changed their molecular structure. That's too much for me to understand, but that's kind of my point. Just when you think she couldn't do anything else, the universe does something amazing. She wakes up. Humans, the only conscious sentient beings that we know to ever exist. I would be willing to bet my life on the fact that we aren't alone. We are just way too far from the right places and very young as a civilization. We all started from one. In other words, we are blood relatives to everything around us. If matter can neither be created or destroyed, what we truly are always exists. Your body will decompose, and you will once again be dust. Forgive my small astronomy eschatology rant. The main 2 points I'm trying to make are, 1, I don't believe death is the end. I think your consciousness will live on in some way. I could be completely wrong, but there is no convincing me all this beauty is for nothing. Just reading all I've wrote here should be enough to prove it's all too amazing for us to be here randomly and without a deeper purpose. 2, we are all connected. After this life ends, our consciousness returns to what it was before. We may have been conscious, but couldn't store memories without a brain. That being said, I've never seen a ghost, UFO, anything supernatural or otherworldly. This memory is the only experience I could put in this category. The category you folks call a glitch in the Matrix. A very close friend of mine called Popper passed away in 2011. He was my next-door neighbor for 7 or 8 years. His grandmother lived in that house before he did, and we lived in it before them. We moved away for a short time, while my parents had a new house built next door. We originally met as young children, maybe 4 or 5. He was 16 years old when he died. He was a hardcore partier. Us and all of our friends were drunk and high almost every day. We drive around town acting stupid. I live in the south, so of course we would ride 4-wheelers and do some mud hogging. We were always looking for something to tear up. Typical ignorant teenage hobbies. An early Sunday morning in June, he left a bar to head home. The bar got shut down shortly after. He either passed out from being inebriated or he had a seizure. He ran off the road and flipped his mom's SUV, killing him instantly, only a mile from where we lived. He was an epileptic, so I was never given a straight answer on what happened. I do know that the booze and drugs were caught regardless. We smoked a lot of spice at the time when it was legal. The doctors thought the spice could have been the cause of his seizures, since they had only started recently. A few weeks after it all, my friend Adam and I drive up to where he's been buried. We get out and sit on the little bench that his mom and dad put out by his headstone. The dirt that covered his casket is still mounded up. It had been raining earlier, so the dirt was soft and muddy. We talked for a bit, then got quiet. We both stared blankly at the mound of dirt covering our late buddy. Adam leaned forward and placed his hand on the mound, leaving his handprint, and I did the same shortly after. A few minutes went by, and neither of us had said a word. I look up at the sky, and there is a massive cloud above us. A wave of warmth rushes over my body, and I felt out of it for a second. Possibly because I was in shock, I still don't know. That cloud was the only cloud in the sky. The shape of it was a perfect handprint. I still get chills every time I think of that moment. I yell at the top of my lungs for Adam to look up. He looked up, kind of scared because I yelled so loud, and then his jaw dropped. He looked back at me with tear-filled eyes and a smile on his face. We stayed there for a while longer before we decided to head home. I know what some of you are thinking. I know that the human mind is capable of something called pareidolia. If you don't know, pareidolia is a tendency for incorrect perception of a stimulus as an object, pattern, or meaning known to the observer, such as seeing shapes in clouds, seeing faces in inanimate objects or abstract patterns, or hearing hidden messages in music. What we saw that day was not that. When I say the handprint was perfect, you could see the lines in the hand, pinky finger bent down, ring finger slightly bent, middle and pointer finger pointing up, the palm was facing us, and thumb sticking straight out. The image is burned into my mind. I can't be sure what happened that day. I'll always wonder if it was just a crazy coincidence, or if death is nothing but another step we have to take. I mean, after all, the atoms we are made of have been through hell already. What's a little decomposition gonna do? 13. I've always had memories that I'm not really sure if they actually happened or if I dreamed them, so I generally just don't talk about them. This is especially odd since I hardly ever dream, or at least don't often remember them if I do. So a little over a year ago I had something truly bizarre happen. I have to start this story by going back to the early 90s. I was going to a community college and got pretty involved in the drama and theater department. There was a group of us that had formed a pretty tight clique, with others welcome in that would come and go, though the core group of us were practically inseparable. For the second show I was involved in, we did Guys and Dolls. A new guy got involved that was very heavy into bodybuilding. Frank, for the sake of this story. Frank and I started hanging out. I remember going to the gym with him and being very amazed to see him doing sets of concentration curls, and about double the weight I could curl with 2 arms. He told me about his twin brother who was also a bodybuilder, though I only met him once for a few minutes. I remember specifically going to a karaoke nightclub and meeting his lifelong best friend, Dino, who he had known since kindergarten. I can even specifically remember singing Blue Suede Shoes that night, and talking to a girl after, and remember us both meeting a woman and him hooking up with her at a party at another member of the theater group's house. Long story short, I remember a lot of things we did together. The next year I transferred to a school out of state and in time lost touch with everyone from that time period. I have since moved back to my home state. A little over a year ago I ran into Frank. I was excited to see him, but he seemed puzzled as to why I seemed so excited to see him. We wound up sitting down and having lunch together. As we spoke, I began reminiscing. He looked at me funny. He eventually told me he didn't know what I was talking about. He said we had been in Guys and Dolls together, but that was about it. According to him, we had never done anything or gotten together outside of that theater hall or even talked much. He said we had never hung out. It gets weirder. He told me he does not have a twin brother and has never had a friend named Dino. This confused me so much that I reached out to a few of the people that had been part of the theater group that I am somewhat in touch with on Facebook. None of them remember Frank and I hanging out. More so, I spoke to the woman whose apartment I remember as bringing the woman we met to, where she and Frank hooked up. She does not remember the woman or Frank ever being in her apartment. As I said at the beginning, I've always had some memories that I'm not sure if they're real or not. But I was 100% positive all these things had happened. There was no doubt in my mind whatsoever. Now, I find myself wondering what other things I remember may never have actually happened. 14. This happened to me a couple of years ago when I was living in a city and worked in a studio. I would like to share this story because I believe there may be an explanation about it. I'll try to make this as detailed as possible. Any help is welcome, or I'll lose my mind for sure. Anyway, here we go. I was living in this block, my apartment being on the 5th floor. It was a nice big apartment in a good part of the city. There are other blocks around it, but it's not jammed like downtown, and there are a lot of trees and broad sidewalks, you know the deal. This story happened on April 2018. Can't remember the day. I have to go deep back in my chat log. So I woke up in the morning with a terrible headache. A classic thing since I used to go to sleep later than 2 a.m. watching memes, while I had to wake up at 7 a.m. to be at work at 8. It seemed it would be a gloomy day. I walked into the kitchen living room, where I had this huge broad window, and I looked out to see a dark grey sky, as if it was ready to pour down some good load of rain. I still had that headache and thought nothing of it, since it was April and we would either have a good sunny day or a gloomy day and perhaps a rainfall. The previous day the sky had some clouds, and I remember I was passing by the port in the evening, seeing a chunk of clouds in the distance westwards. But I couldn't tell if they were coming this way or going away. Anyway, I couldn't care less for the weather. I was no farmer, had my own car to go to work, so I would never pay much attention to it. So as I was getting ready to go to work, I put on my raincoat, grabbed my umbrella, and I stroll out. The corridor and the staircase have no windows whatsoever, only some lights in the corridors. I hated this part of the block, so I took the lift from 5 to 1 where the garage is. If I hated something more than the windowless corridors, it was this stupid lift. The door was tall, and it had mirrors on all sides except for the floor. They even put a mirror in the ceiling. But the worst thing is that sometimes it would stop working for a couple minutes or so. It would either happen when you would be waiting for it on the corridor or when you were inside. The administrator of the block was a nice guy, but he was too lazy to fix this or any of the other problems. He told us, though, to switch the power off and on again, and then hit the button on the floor and it would work. And it did work. So I was going down, it suddenly stops. I did the procedure and it did the trick. But it happened again. And again. From the 5th floor to the garage, it happened like 4 times. Which has never happened to me before. I was getting pissed that I was going to be late to work, and cloudy days had increased traffic. The final time it happened, I had to do the procedure 5 or 6 times for it to work. I was getting late for work, and I started getting infuriated. I'm gonna have a few words with that old lazy weasel when I come back, I thought. Eventually, I reached the garage, got in the car, and was heading out. And I was reaching the street level. I noticed that the clouds have vanished, and it was a sunny day. Don't get me wrong, there were still a few white small clouds, but I felt stunned. I spent so much time to fix the lift that the clouds went away, I thought. In the streets there were a few people walking around in light clothes. I still thought nothing of it. They must have changed before going out. Eventually I got to work, leaving my raincoat and the umbrella in the car. As I walked in late, my manager noticed me and asked me what happened. Even though I'm a bit of a shithead, I was never ever late for work. So I told him that I was trying to find my raincoat and my umbrella, and I got stuck in the lift. He then asked me, "Why the hell would you want a raincoat on such a beautiful day?" I answered that when I woke up, it wasn't that beautiful. He then proceeds to tell me that he woke up at 6 a.m., and apart from a couple small clouds, it was going to be a nice day all along. At this point, I began to lose my words and said something along the lines of, "Well, I don't know, it seemed gloomy to me. Sorry, it won't happen again." At this point, I thought he was screwing around with me. He's a good guy, but he is always ironic if someone is late for work or doesn't do the job well. In any case, as I find my co-workers chilling in the break room, seeing them all in light spring clothes and not a single umbrella in the room, I asked them, on purpose, if they expected the weather to turn out so well. They told me it was always this good weather, and when I claimed that I woke up to a murky weather with dark grey clouds ready to rain, they looked at me like I was this awkward dude who makes uncle jokes at parties. They told me that I needed some rest, and maybe I was still dreaming. I guess I needed some rest, but I told them I was not asleep and I knew what I saw. Well, we changed the subject until our manager came in to announce our duties for the day. Everything went back to normal as if nothing ever happened. I forgot about this, and I only remembered it again in the evening when I was looking out the window eastwards. Then, for the first time in a long time, I saw the weather forecast of the previous day. There was not a single report of a cloudy day. That screwed me up. I could accept that the weather may change fast enough. If there is a strong wind, even if it happens so fast, I could accept it. But this is an entirely different thing. I searched hard to find any videos or photos taken early in the morning, and none of the few I got had clouds or implied a cloudy weather. I even asked a friend of mine who works a night shift, and he told me he can't remember the sky being cloudy. I know I was awake and I know what I saw. I just can't explain it. I've talked about it with a couple of people I trust, and they had no clue at all. I tried to keep it to myself even though it was troubling me a lot. I was thinking this a lot when I was alone, until I moved out of the city. I would forget it until someone told me that they experienced a weird glitch or something of this sort. But when I remember it, it keeps challenging me for a week or so. Recently, I found the glitch subreddit, and I thought that someone there may have an explanation that will prevent my head from exploding. 15. This is going to be a long story, as this has been happening near constantly for about the past 5 or so years. I have surpassed the point of having mental breakdowns and blaming myself constantly for these events. I am beginning to accept that these little glitches are just a part of my life. I need to vent, compile everything that has happened, and maybe feel less alone in the process. Here goes. December 13th, 2014. My grandmother had given me an engraved red iPod 5th generation for my 18th birthday. The gift was so sweet, I teared up. I set my iPod up that morning and downloaded my apps and music. That evening, we were going shopping, to the movies, out for dinner, etc., to spend some time together. It was an awesome day. However, when we got home, my iPod was not in my purse. I placed it in a specific pocket and did not take it out all day. I searched the car up and down, pulling out the floor mats and everything. Gone. I searched the entire house just to be sure that I didn't leave it at home. Gone. Called every place we've been and no one had found it. I figured at that point, it probably fell out just by chance and someone stole it. I felt like absolute shit. My grandma was pretty disappointed, since she had it engraved just for me and everything. I have missed it ever since. Up until my grandma found it this past summer in 2019. Nearly 5 years later, under her floor mat, it still worked. Her car had been professionally cleaned multiple times throughout the years. We were absolutely floored. To think all those years it was just chilling under the mat. Nah, how? July 2015. I'm staying with a friend for the weekend. My phone goes missing. We were the only people at home. On Saturday night, we decided to play with a spirit board. Now, I've been doing this occasionally for years. They do work, and I acknowledge that. I'm a very spiritual person. But I typically don't look too far into whatever the boards say. However, this night, the board just kept saying basket over and over again. And then, eventually, see basket, spelled S-E-A. We were confused and brushed it off. Keep in mind, my phone was still missing during this time. It had been missing since Friday when I arrived, and it was Saturday night when we did this. We joked that maybe it was telling me where my phone was, but we had already checked every basket in the house. The next morning, before I gave up and left without my phone, we decided to do one more quick look. Lo and behold, there it was in a basket. My friend had a little basket with a lid where she kept her gym card, mail key, pool key, etc., and my phone was in there. We had opened that basket multiple times when we grabbed the pool key, and this was while the phone was missing, so we should have seen it. My phone had been missing Friday to Sunday. August 2015. This was when my clothes started going missing. Specifically my band t-shirts and literally anything with a flannel print. It all started with this Deftones shirt that I loved. Things would go missing in the process of me changing. Literally, I could set the shirt down on my bed, and in the process of me changing, it would disappear and never show up again. This all happened in my own bedroom. Even after cleaning the entire bedroom and rearranging furniture, the clothes that vanished never came back. It was usually sentimental ones too. Damn. September 2015. I start college. My first day on campus, when I got back to my car, a small jar of quarters, my travel mug planets on it, and my brand new hoodie I had bought earlier that day were gone. But I noticed that my car window was down. I figured that someone had simply reached in and pulled up the lock and stole my stuff. I blamed myself for being dumb and not shutting my windows. I reported it to campus police anyway. We all agreed it was pretty odd, though. It was the middle of the day, first day of classes, in a very busy area. Pretty ballsy thief, right? Well, here's the thing. A few hours later, I walk to my campus Starbucks to hang out. As I sit down and I'm opening up my laptop, my stomach drops. I thought I was losing my mind. On the floor, in the corner by a window, in the campus Starbucks, slumped against the wall, was the same exact hoodie that was taken from my car that day. I assumed it couldn't be mine. I walked over, and loosely wrapped inside of it was my jar of quarters and my mug. Of course, no one I talked to about this really believed much of it. It didn't sit right with me. There was at least $25 worth of quarters. Why would someone steal from my car and not even keep the money at least? October 2015. My college parking pass goes missing. It was in my car the entire time, and had never left my car all semester. Parking passes are expensive, and I could see why someone would steal it. However, my skilled parking attendants scan each pass when they check the lot to confirm it isn't expired and see who the car belongs to. So I go to the parking office and they give me a new one. To make a long story short, I kept getting tickets despite having a brand new pass clearly visible in my windshield. After the third ticket, the parking office was pissed at the attendants for giving me tickets for no reason. They did some investigating. And the reason I was getting tickets is because the pass that the attendants were scanning was the original parking pass that we had thought to be stolen. It was registered as expired because they issued a new one. The new pass was now the pass missing. And I had to be given a third parking pass. How the hell did the original pass that went missing out of thin air magically come back and replace the new one? 2016. I know this is a really broad period of time, but you know how I mentioned in an earlier bullet point that my clothes would go missing in the middle of changing? Yep, this happened nearly every week during this time. Most never returned. My phone would be in weird places around the house that I couldn't even reach. I'm 4'11". My entire wallet went missing in my own house during this time, and reappeared under the basement stairs over 2 months later. Next to a sentimental ring my mom had dropped back in 2010, and looked in that spot for multiple times. July 2017. I found items that went missing from my family home during a supposed break-in, back in 2009, were found at a flea market hours away. I took a trip with my best friend to a flea market we love, which was about 2 hours away. As a quick background, back in 2009, while my mom was in rehab and I was staying with my grandma full-time for a week or so, we went back to check in my mom's house. I went to make lunch and realized that all our plates and silverware, which we passed through the family over the years, were gone. After getting confirmation from my mom that those plates were there when she left, we reported it as a break-in. The cops were confused as to how anyone could have broken in because all of the windows were still locked and nothing else was stolen. Anyway, I see the same exact set at the flea market. I begin turning over the plates and see my great-grandmother's beautiful name carefully written on the bottom of each one. 8 years later, I found the missing plates 2 hours away. August 2018. I started school at a new college. Remember the parking pass fiasco from a previous bullet point? Basically the same thing happened. I couldn't believe it. My pass that I used to scan myself into the parking garage went missing, so I got a new one after about a week of searching. Then one day I pull up to the garage and it isn't scanning. Nothing is happening. I go ahead and take a ticket and go to the parking office. Turns out I was trying to use the old pass. My new one was gone. My new pass yet again mysteriously disappeared and was replaced. Yet again by my old one that was originally missing. January 2019. More parking pass bull. I get an email out of nowhere from the college I no longer attend. It was from the parking office. It was a ticket for using an expired parking pass. They attached a picture of a car that wasn't my car. I called them immediately and explained that I haven't attended there in over a year and that isn't my car. They looked up the info in the system and guess what? You know the new pass they issued way back in 2015 that I never found? It was that pass. Clearly someone was using it when they weren't supposed to. But how the hell did they get my pass from 4 years ago? If it was stolen from me back in 2015, why would they just now be using it? February 2019. Current. My debit card is declined in a drive-thru. Since my bank is close by, I drive there and tell them my card was declined. I figured it was a mistake. Turns out I was using a debit card that was lost back in 2017. I check my wallet, and my current card is in there too. How could a card that's been missing for nearly 2 years just be sitting in my wallet? That I organize nightly due to stuff like this happening just be sitting there. I moved homes twice by this point and had an entirely different wallet. Surely I would have pulled it out on accident sooner. After this point, I really can't remember too many specific things missing and reappearing because it happens so much. Multiple times a month, something goes missing. It doesn't matter how important it is or how careful I was with where I put it. However, rather than having items reappear years later in a weird spot, they usually end up right in their original location after I purchase a new one, or have an absolute mental breakdown because I need the item. I have done everything I can. I have organized my entire life. I have made a list and reminder of everything. I went minimal and made a list of the items I own and what room they are kept in. I got on ADHD medication in hopes that it was just me being distracted. Whilst doing these things helped many areas of my life, it did nothing to stop things missing for days at a time. It is affecting my life. It is wasting my time and money. I almost feel crazier now because I'm so careful and things still disappear. Recently, my social security card, birth certificate, passport, and debit card went missing. I realized this last week of February and was determined to find them. The card had to be in my wallet, and my certificates were all in the same folder, inside of a filing cabinet in my closet. I needed at least one of those papers to prove my identity, and I needed the card to go to the grocery store. My boyfriend and I tore the house apart, emptied all wallets. He swore he had last seen me put my debit card in my wallet. He remembered me putting my important documents in that file. I was a mess. I broke down. I still persisted in waiting to replace the items. Today I had a breakdown which prompted me to make this post. I was going to order a new card today and had plans to get a new birth certificate tomorrow. Keep in mind, these things have been missing for weeks. I haven't looked in days and just checked today. I ended up finding all of the missing items that have been missing for weeks. They were in the original locations that I had first checked, where they should have been this entire time. I was elated. I was so happy. I sat down to do some remote work since I'm working from home now, and the headset that I've been using all morning is missing. It was at my desk. We can't find it. Anyways, that's all I've got. Like I said, this happens constantly. My Nintendo Switch went missing for a few days a couple weeks ago and showed back up. My shirts still go missing sometimes when I'm changing. I'm so used to it now that I accept it as part of my life. If you read this far, what do you think about this, guys? I've seen some missing item posts, but I'm at the point where I feel cursed by this. Is my life glitching? 16. So I have this cute umbrella I bought when I was in Japan. It's a UV rain umbrella that's black and has black lace along the edge, which isn't something you can come by in a regular store in my country. I asked my mom a few days ago if she saw where I left my umbrella. She said she last saw it in our shoe closet by the front door. I went to check the closet this morning because I'm not trying to walk in the rain to school. It wasn't there. So I checked in every closet it could have been in, to no avail. After searching my house about 10 or 15 minutes, I end up leaving late, with a different umbrella. This one is red. I commute to my college via the same train route almost every day. It's not too far, but it's in the next town over. I had to use my umbrella while waiting for the train because the shelters are full. When I was getting on the train, I took my usual seat by the window. After I put my backpack beside me, I saw a black umbrella handle in between the seats. At first I thought, oh no, someone left their umbrella on the train. But then I picked it up, and it was the umbrella that I was looking for this morning. Black lace trim and all. At first I thought it was sheer luck. I left my umbrella on this exact train car a few weeks ago, and I just happened to board the same train again, and it was still in the same place I forgot it. But I spent 10 to 15 minutes tearing my closet and every closet downstairs apart trying to look for this thing, because my mom says it was there, she saw it. The only thing I took out was a different umbrella from the tall vase we keep all our umbrellas in. I came home and told my sister about it, and she vividly remembers seeing it in the same place my mom described just a few days ago. So 2 people saw my umbrella in the same place. It wasn't there when I was looking for it, and it appeared in the train I take to school. Makes no sense to me. I ended up telling my mom this happened, and she said she put it on the bench by the front door for me before she left for her early morning shift yesterday. My mom is so certain she put it on the bench, she asked me if I was on drugs. Anything on the bench is hard to miss. If it was there, I wouldn't have grabbed a different umbrella. She even asked my dad where he last saw it, and he also said it was in the shoe closet. So now it's most of my immediate family that says it was in the shoe closet, except for my youngest sister, who is 8 and is too short to see where it was kept. Freaky. 17. I'd went to boxing about an hour prior to the incident, and I noticed that my middle knuckle on my right hand had been getting really red recently, since the last few times I went. I wear hand wraps, but had been putting more power into my punches on the back recently. So I'm just walking around half an hour after showering, and have my clothes on when my mom calls me to her room to grab some clothes she'd ironed. These clothes had been sitting out and were not warm. I explained the story to my friends, and they kept insisting that the clothes must have been freshly ironed, but they'd been sitting there for at least 15 minutes. So as I got to pick up the pile of shirts, I whack my knuckle against the ironing board, and instantly feel a lot of pain, and do that thing where you run around. In this case, I run out the front room, and jump around for a second to relieve yourself of the pain. As I walk back into the room, my clothes in my arm, my knuckle really starts to sting, and I swear down that I felt blood pouring out of my knuckle. But I was holding the pile of clothes on top of my crossed arm, so I couldn't visibly see anything. Now I have a history of fainting the odd time, but there never is a constant trigger. It can be anything from a little cut to a time when I got hit by a frisbee thrown at me, slashing my eyebrow. So I told my mom that I think I'm going to faint, so I should go to my dad because I'm sure he's busted a knuckle before, and because I knew there was pop, which ended up being sugar-free Fresca, so I'm blacking out as I'm walking to the couch and my dad's talking to me calmly, while getting me to keep my blood flowing, and I feel the blood on my hand keep going. After around 7 or 8 minutes of this, my dad said he'd take a quick look and started laughing. I figured it was just a way to trick me into thinking there was nothing there, as he's done it before. But when he told me to look for myself and there was nothing there and my hand felt dry. Now, I don't believe in the supernatural per se, but I've had and heard a few weird experiences myself. But I swear to God my knuckle was busted open, but was suddenly healed, and somehow it never happened. I was so confused and shocked and didn't even feel stupid because of how entirely sure I was that it had been bleeding. 18. I was invited to join a couple at a local casino to meet some singers at the lounge. I jumped into the car just as it started raining. I had to get gas and had $10 until payday. This was during the time gas was over $5 a gallon. I knew I could get to the casino and to work later that night safely, and the next day was payday. I worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I pulled into the gas station and noticed 2 lines of cars waiting their turn. I pulled up to a single pump, but this one had only a gas hose. When I got out, it was still raining, but I was covered by the pump's awning. I watched the gauge to make sure I put in only $10. The pump kept going, and I noticed the price said $1.34 a gallon. I thought I didn't see it correctly because of the rain, but it still filled my tank. I passed by the same station in the morning. The single pump was gone, and the entryway I used to pull in the station was gone. But I still had a full tank. It was a nice glitch. 19. So my husband and I got married last September. I'm not really materialistic, but I fell in love with the necklace I wore, and kept it hanging on the rearview mirror in my van from the day after the wedding on. Well, in December I wrecked the van, The next day I went to retrieve my property from it as it was totaled, and my necklace was gone. It couldn't be found anywhere. This morning I opened my jewelry box to put my earrings in it, and there was my necklace. I've opened that jewelry box almost every day, and it was never in there. I never even brought it back to the house after we got married, but, randomly, there it is. 20. Last year I attended a music festival 16 hours away by car. I made what was by far my biggest playlist ever while I was at work, and I wanted to make sure I heard one of my favorite songs all the time, like a Rolling Stone, on the drive to this momentous occasion. I distinctly remember trying to come up with a special placement for this song and thinking, what if I timed it so it played right as I crossed the Tennessee border? I realized that there was no easy way to calculate where to place it on a giant Spotify playlist, especially when taking into account bathroom and food breaks. I gave up on the TN border and tried to have it play sometime in the afternoon when I needed a pick-me-up. My life after the music festival moved pretty fast. I quit my job, went on a 2-month bicycle tour, and after a long search, found a job closer to my brother. I packed a car with everything I owned and started driving towards my new life. I thought it would be fitting to play straight through my festival playlist. After all, Bonnaroo encouraged me to shake things up with the bike tour in the first place. And it was the bike tour which had showed me the part of the country which I was moving to. In many senses, I felt like I was completing a cycle. I took the scenic route through the Adirondacks and Vermont to save some money on tolls. There were some stretches of spotty reception, yes, I was burning data, but overall I was enjoying the snow-capped peaks that I would have missed by taking the interstate. I regained cell service as I descended down a mountain in a fairly remote part of Green Mountain National Forest. Run the Jewels kicked off this particular phase of listening session. The energy continued with a steady mix of hip-hop, funk, and heavy rock. It wasn't exactly afternoon at this point, but it was just the pick-me-up I needed. Not what I had planned, but just how I intended. Life by Saba played, and I crossed over the Connecticut River. During the song's final chords, I was able to make out the words of a sign on the other end of the bridge, and I read them out aloud. Welcome to New Hampshire, live free or die. The snare cracked as I passed the sign. It was like a rolling stone. I sang through the whole song in a mixture of laughter and screams. I will never forget the feeling of having this masterfully crafted message, seemingly specially delivered directly through the airwaves, and having my voice and body resonate with the moment. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Glitch Monthly number 8. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you yourself have a glitch story you'd like me to feature in next month's video, or possibly the month after that, we'll see, please do send it along to kingofthecities@gmail.com. You can find the email address, if you didn't catch that there, find it in the description of the video. Let's click show more, and then you'll find the description, and there'll be the various links, email, and various other things. And if you're on mobile, unless they've changed it recently, I believe if you look next to the video title, there should be a little downward-facing arrow. Tap that, that'll show you the description. Okay, now before we go on, I have a couple of shout-outs I'd like to do. Let's see, what's number one? Number one. Disappearing and reappearing. Alright, let's make sure I get this right. 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15. Right, the author of story number 15. That was the very lovely, lengthy story about the poor person who just has such great misfortune with all the objects disappearing from their lives, the clothes, the parking, the phones, and whatnot. That would be Reddit user 777 Saturn 777. Thank you very much, very kindly, for the use of your story. And next shout out goes to the author of the final story, our Rolling Stones fan, like a rolling stone. That would be Ian McFluffagus. Well, that's a remarkable name. And Ian, there is also a YouTube channel, which I will be linking to. And their YouTube is actually Sid Hazel. I believe they're a musician. And if that is their original composition on there, I'm very impressed. I will link to it if I haven't. Throw cabbages at me and or money. Well, I suppose they're both green, aren't they? Throw cabbages, probably cheaper. Throw cabbages at me and I will rectify the situation. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to wrap up there. I've lots of editing to do and I'm feeling hungry. So until next time, thank you very much for listening and take very good care of yourselves.